before we get started, I'll just do a quick introduction to myself and then go around the other panellists and get them to introduce themselves. So my name is Katy Guthrie and I'm the Head of Data at Scotland Is. My role is really about helping companies within the data and AI sector in Scotland, from startups through to kind of bigger, more established companies. We run various different activities, both to foster community and also to kind of come together around some of the common challenges. I mentioned the session on explainable AI that we held yesterday. And it's, it covers other challenges around about sometimes skills, access to markets. Brexit's another one that we're covering too. And then I also kind of try and do some signposting of various different opportunities, sometimes funding or support or connections, that kind of thing. And so if you're interested, do reach out to me on LinkedIn. And that's enough about me. I will introduce the rest of my panellists. So I will pass over. Albert, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Katy. So I'm Albert King and I'm Chief Data Officer in the Scottish Government. And that essentially means that I'm responsible for policy, platforms and capability around data and data-driven innovation in Scotland. So things like Scotland's AI strategy, the government's open data strategy and supporting public bodies across Scotland to publish open data, the data elements of the Open Government Action Plan. So just by way of example, and around things like capability, trying to support and drive innovation in the way we use data in Scotland's public sector, and indeed working very closely with my colleagues in digital economy on the kind of economic development. Thank you, Katy.
Thanks. Charlotte, would you like to go next?
Yep. Sure. So I'm Charlotte Sayed. So I work for NatWest Group, formerly RBS. I work in the retail banking or personal banking strategy and innovation team. So we're mainly responsible for setting that long-term view for personal banking, but also looking at what ideas and areas that we need to look at within technology to meet that sort of aspiration in the future. So, yep, that's me.
Thank you. Jake? Oh.
It's taking time to get the button pressed on the speech. I'm Jake Ansell, currently Deputy Director of Research in the Business School with responsibility for knowledge exchange and impact. I am a data scientist. I've worked on many projects, primarily from a statistical point of view, but I'm also a management scientist, so I'm also want to solve the problems as well as not only talking about them and modeling them. I've been involved with many organizations across all areas of society. So I've done a lot of work with banks, insurance companies, engineering, and supply of energy, etc., but I also work with charities at the same time to make sure that we cover the whole of the community.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the format for today's panel session, we've got a couple of topics, both themed around innovating with open data. So can I ask people just to put any questions as we go into the chat or into the Q&A function, and then I can feed them into the discussion, and then we'll maybe do some raising hands and unmuting at the end of both topics. So the topics, we've decided to start quite wide, and for our first topic we're looking at the future role of data in driving sustainable change within and across organisations. So just to kind of start that one, and I think actually before we start on that one, I think that flows very nicely from the point that Antonia was making earlier in her piece around about feeding that work into the Scottish Government, because then it's kind of going across organisations. So anyway, just to get started, the first question we had was around about the role of data in shaping the future of your organisation. Charlotte, can I start with you?
Great. So in personal banking, we're very much driven by the customer and the customer's response to the products and services that we offer. I think I personally have been looking at digital identity and also data sharing over the past couple of years within this space. And to be fair to say, at the moment, there's a lot going on. And I think data is a big enabler to anything that we do. And we're trying to deepen our relationships with customers. And we really only see that data is the best way forward for us. We're moving more and more into this digital and online world as well. So we expect that we can get richer, better data from that as well. Identity, as I mentioned as well, is a big thing for us. I think during this COVID period, we've seen a real push to develop identity and how we identify people online without increasing our fraud risk. So for us, that whole digital data identity and data sharing piece is a big one, and we see our role in that in the future has been quite a big part to play in that whole ecosystem as well. You know, it'd be fair to say that the world is definitely changing at the moment, and we see data as a big part of that.
Okay, thank you. Can I put the same question to Albert?
Yeah, so that's a pretty big question. I mean, I suppose the one way into that might be to think about, you know, Scottish Government's vision for data, that we increasingly move to use data systematically to improve lives and save time and improve public services. And I think that, you know, in the context of the current COVID crisis, you know, we see data being used, and the demand for data from ministers, from officials, and from everybody in public services, you know, it's never been greater. I think that you know, that has then enabled us to show, first of all, that the value of data. So I think that helps us to build the case and demonstrate that our organisation, not just the Scottish Government, but the public sector as a whole, is a data-driven organisation. But it's also shown the need that doesn't, you know, come for free, and that we need to invest in our data infrastructure. And I don't by that just mean, you know, the hard stuff, like, you know, physical stuff like data centres and wires and stuff. I mean the skills to consume it. I mean the investment in the quality of the data itself, and the standards that sit around it, and the information governance, and the ethics and the privacy and so forth. So I think there's certainly that hunger for data, ensuring that policy decisions and ministers' decisions are evidence-based within government, but also as a government ensuring that our public services are delivered using the best possible data, that decisions are made using the best possible data, and also importantly that our communities and our publics are well served with and informed with data, you know, so that I mean, again, to use a current example, so that people can understand what's happening in their communities in relation to the prevalence of COVID. And that's, you know, clearly very important, so that people can make kind of evidence-based judgments and decisions as well. And I think Antonia's presentation earlier as well demonstrated, you know, the value of the data that gets released and that we release. So I guess that's my broad answer to that. And very interested, Charlotte, that you're working on digital identity, because that's also something that preoccupies me as well. So yeah, lots of interesting connections there. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you, Albert. Jake, can I put that question to you too, the big one?
Well, essentially, the revolution in education has probably not succeeded to the extent we would have liked. We suddenly all become teachers via the various media that we can use, with face-to-face being very limited. It essentially has made major changes to the university, but also, obviously, at the present time, the university itself is switching on to digital in a major way across a whole series of areas. So open banking, which Charlotte will be able to talk lots more about, is one aspect of that. But I've been looking at it in contexts where it is useful to help people in society who may be socially disadvantaged. But it's also a major driver of some work we're doing on tourism and helping look at supporting the economy and making sure that tourism is sustainable into the future. So we've been working on projects in those contexts. I would highlight Invergordon and the Isle of Skye, but it's this general thing that, as everybody says, the university is there as a resource, or should be a resource to society. And there are many people tackling the issues within the University of Ethics, and interpretable AI or explainable AI. One of the other supervisor of Antonia, my claim to fame is I am the second supervisor of Antonia, is Belen Martin Barragan, who essentially does a lot of work in explainable AI.
Okay, thank you. I guess thinking about some of these various different projects and pieces of work to bring data together and use data to drive change, there are inevitably barriers that we hit. So I guess if we can kind of go around and say, what are the biggest challenges that we face in using data to get to these desired outcomes? And I'm happy to let whoever wants to jump in first.
I'm deferring to others to start that conversation, but the concept of identity, digital identity, is one important thing. It is strongly that issue around maintaining data in ways that are secure for the individual that it refers to. I mean, there's obviously the work of Tim Berners-Lee on that aspect, but there are other aspects that we need to take into account. I was looking at developing, along with Antonia and other people, synthetic data as a solution that would protect people by creating synthetic data. But at any stage, for that data to be useful, it has to have the possibility of giving you meaningful connection to the society. Totally synthetic is useless. Partially synthetic might be useful, provided you can anonymize it in such a way that it is possible. And it is that question of using something like synthetic data to move forward.
Yeah, I guess to address some of the kind of privacy and ethical concerns around that, and that is a good option. So that's overcoming a challenge. And I guess, what about some of the other challenges? And I'll kind of ask Albert to come in on that, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess on the digital identity piece, and others may well be aware of this, but Scotland has been well recognised as taking a leading approach on this, and very much one that is informed by a range of expert views from civil society, from academia, from industry and others, and that recognises that people want to be able to control the way in which their identity and their attributes are shared, and that sharing is on a proportionate basis, and be in control of that. And I think that is, that's very helpful, I think, in Scotland. I think we now need to deliver on that, and we're working to make that into a demonstrable instantiation of all of those principles and that approach in technology. I mean, I think that at the same time we also have to recognise that there are interests that society has in the way we use data. So again, pandemic demonstrates that. As a society, it's important that we are able to access data on our population, to keep in view what's happening with the virus and be able to respond to that appropriately. And that's, clearly this is not just a public health crisis, it's an economic and social crisis as well. So that then, implies that we need to understand where, for example, the financial impacts are, and where financially vulnerable populations are, so that we can make sure that we're supporting them, or at least that they have access to that support. But I mean, I think fundamentally, as always, it's down to the barriers. the barriers are the perennial ones. We need to get the right people into to get the right technology and the right data to solve the challenges. And that then leads us into the challenges of skills, and not just the high order skills of our data scientists, but also the skills of the folks who then consume those products and their ability to interpret and make decisions based on data. You know, around the technology, you know, having safe environments, including government, we're trying to make sure that we've got those, and we've accelerated a number of those recently. And around getting the right data together, you know, fundamentally, we need to know where it is, but we also need to have the confidence and trust. And those are two sides of the same coin. You know, on the one hand, the confidence to be able to bring that data together, and understanding what that means in terms of information governance and ethics. And we need to be open and transparent with the public, so that publics are informed about how data is being used, and that we're thinking about public attitudes around these things. So I think, yeah, I think, Katy, you know, for me, this is always about getting the skills right, the technology right, and the data and the information governance and ethics around that right. And always, you know, we're pushing on that, as you'd expect.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, I guess picking up on your information governance point, and you mentioned the standards. It's having that whole metadata and the way of being able to kind of get in and find what you're looking for, and have the confidence that it is what you're looking for, and that everyone is viewing it in the same way, which is the kind of key point with some of the metadata. Charlotte, can I put?
Yeah, you can. I'll take that as well. I was just going to say the governance is a big piece for us. You know, this is new for us, this whole, you know, data sharing across different organisations and industries. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is trying to bring our sort of risk and security colleagues along in the journey as well, to say, look, this is something that our customers get. We did some customer research, we got their feedback, and they actually understand it and they have an appetite for it. So we have to bring them along on the journey, and it's very key to get them in early on some of the technologies and things that we're looking at. And it is a long journey as well, because we are pushing the boundaries a bit. I think the other piece is maybe around the collaboration. So this is a bit new for banking to start to collaborate more with others. We've always been fairly competitive. And also, if you think about government and private sector working together, you know, we've had the Verify scheme with digital identity, but it hasn't really been very successful. And there's a real push now to get this sort of next scheme working in the public and private sector. So I think there's some challenges around getting collaboration working well. But yeah, those are probably kind of the big things for us, you know, around barriers. But, you know, we're working through them, so. Okay.
Thank you. And I guess, are there any examples that anyone can give us of either a success or a failure in terms of using data? Charlotte, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, I think a couple of things maybe around success. So we got a new CEO this year, Alison Rose, and when she joined as CEO, she decided we were going to be a purpose-led bank. So we were very much driven by our three sort of purpose pillars, which are around, you know, combating climate change, improving financial capability and educating people more around finances, and also supporting our small and medium-sized businesses as well. So that really drives the work that we do. And thinking about sort of the capability piece, we've recently launched something called Banking My Way, which is helping people to self-identify their vulnerabilities. So providing information up front to say, you know, I have a particular disability, but I'm also in a vulnerable situation as well. And with that data, we can then help serve them better. And we also see that helping us if COVID does carry on and, you know, we see it getting worse again, we could potentially help those customers a bit more proactively, rather than at the beginning of the pandemic, we're a bit like, who are our vulnerable customers, you know? Who do we go out to? We could maybe look at, you know, age brackets and say, well, that's a particular age bracket that might be vulnerable, but this way we can get a bit more of a richer data sort of set on these people, and that will then help us deliver better to these customers as well. So that one's a bit of a success. We're also looking at something around carbon footprints. So for personal customers, we are partnering with a company called Kogo to help look at their carbon footprint, and we're hopefully with the data off the back of that, we can then help people to make better informed decisions around products and services, companies they shop with every day. And we're sort of hoping that that will drive some better behaviours as well. I mean, those are just a couple of small things, but you know, there's more going on in the background. But yeah, those are a couple of things I'd love to see really go on and be great success. But so far, yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. And you've actually partly covered one of the questions, the question that we had in there for in the chat around about people with disabilities and how you're covering that in your digital identity work stream. Just by sheer luck, you've covered it as you went. And the other part of that question also was around about for the Scottish Government. Is that something that you're considering within the digital identity work stream?
Yeah, absolutely, Katie. I mean, one of the key issues for that programme has been thinking about ensuring that every part of our population can access the sort of digital identity services, and that has all sorts of implications for thinking about different groups in society, including those who are less able, but also those who don't have access or easy access to digital channels. So it definitely does, you know, has featured, and you know, we're very conscious of our obligation to provide a universal service essentially to every part of our population, definitely. Okay,
thanks very much. And I guess that possibly is a nice little segue into our second discussion topic. Just to keep encouraging people, do put anything you want me to feed into the chat or the Q&A. But our second discussion topic, we decided to pick from the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we're looking at Goal 13, which is reduced inequalities, which is particularly topical at the moment, given the ways in which COVID-19 has exacerbated inequalities. We've got rising unemployment, which is particularly prevalent in people with lower paid jobs, and those are often the people who are most exposed as well, because they're still having to be physically present to do some of those jobs. Then it's also exacerbating some of the existing health inequalities and the issues with the BAME population suffering more. We're kind of exposed early on. We've all moved our lives online, but that's more difficult for people who've got limited access to devices or connectivity or don't have the right skills, so they can become more disenfranchised. So we thought that the Goal 13 of reduced inequalities was an interesting one to discuss in the context of how we can use data and open data in particular to try and address these challenges. So I guess the first question is really, what uses of data do we have that we know of that are specifically focusing in on reducing inequalities? And Jake, can I get you to, I'm just going to pick you.
Yeah, so thank you very much. The first thing I'll start off with is using data to look at financial capability. Now, we haven't addressed the issue of disability within that. We've been looking at post-16 experiences in schools of education where financial education tended to stop at 16, yet the most important transition people make is beyond that, where they go out into the world of work or they go into further education where they're on their own. And so led by Tina Harrison, that we are doing work which actually shows that we can have interventions which improve both genders' benefits of understanding the problems that they will have or could have into the future, but also actually brings women more strongly up than men, so that they're closing the gap, narrowing the gap in terms of financial capability. But there's a lot of work I'm involved with on both affordable loans, work on dealing with people who are vulnerable for several different reasons, with people like Scott Cash and Salad Money, trying to assist them to get money, possibly not at a better rate than the banks, but they are people who would usually not have the benefit of having a bank loan. And in terms of that, I'm also looking at social enterprises and the funding and management of those with people at Napier in that sense. So yeah, tackling people who are vulnerable is very important for society.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's your point about I guess the point I was making about some of the financial impacts of COVID-19, and I know there's been work done on that in Scottish Government. Albert, do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, thanks, Katy. So I mean, I guess again, there's lots in this one, isn't there? Around the financial impact, we're looking very closely at the impact on consumers and individuals, but also on companies. And it's actually been, in the context of the pandemic, it's been a bit of a journey that we've been on to develop the data that we've got, because traditionally what the financial reporting data that we use is somewhat lags what's happening in the real economy. And actually, it's a good example of one where we've been collaborating really closely, actually with the University of Edinburgh, with UK government departments and civil society and wider academia around, and actually, sorry, the financial services sector, around getting using data that's available to financial services organizations to get a more real-time picture of what's happening in our economy and to consumers, and where those vulnerabilities exist, both geographically and in which sections of sectors of the economy, and in which kind of social groups. And I think that's vitally important. It doesn't quite get into that predictive space, but I think given that governments have often really lagged real-time indicators, I think it's really important. I'm also, conscious that this discussion is about open data, and one of the things I'm very keen to do is always very interested in, actually, given my kind of open data brief. I mean, we publish a huge amount of open data about Scotland, about our people and our places and our public services, we've seen a lot of that being taken up through the pandemic. We've seen a lot of that interest around COVID data, and that's been really exciting to see that being used. Scotland's Tech Army created a great open data dashboard, for example, that was kind of enabled for those who are hearing impaired. And what I'm really interested in understanding from groups such as this is, what kind of open data can we make available so that we can get more engagement with civil society, with groups out with the public sector, to help address inequalities, because government has some of the answers, but it doesn't have all of the answers. And I think there's a real opportunity here for open data to empower communities and to enable a more informed public dialogue. And I'm always really interested, I guess, in understanding from groups such as this. I'd be really interested in feedback from the group today on what can we do differently, what data should we be providing, how should we be providing it in a way that people can really get access to and consume and use meaningfully.
Thanks, Albert. And I guess people can just pop any observations on that in the chat if they've got them. And I guess it's also the points we were making earlier about being able to discover it as well. There is a lot of open data published by the government, but how well used is it, and how do people find it if they're looking, and is it what they're looking for, which is your question. I guess we've focused a little bit there on financial inequalities, and actually we've not spoken to Charlotte, who works in the financial services sector. So can I ask you to come in on that one?
Yep. Maybe there's a couple of things. So I think around COVID, we really started to think about health data, maybe for the first time, and how we can try and help people get back into sort of the workplace, everyday lives. This was initially, right back at the start, and we have done some exploration with Solid, which is Sir Tim Berners-Lee product, just to see how that could work and think about how we can enable people to get back into workplace. That's still a bit ongoing for us at the moment, but the other areas around financial capability is just focusing on people in their roles. So looking at sort of that liquid workforce as well. You know, we know that off the back of COVID, people's work lives are going to change, and they could have second jobs, they could start up their own businesses. How do we enable them to be as capable in doing that? And I think that's a real area for us on the financial capability, looking at those sectors like BAME as well, but also understanding, you know, if you've got someone who's lost a job, say through, you know, the furlough scheme ending or just ending up without a home as well, how do we enable people that are in those situations to get back into life, work, whatever they need to. And being online and digital now, there's more possible because we don't need them to visit branches, or we don't need them to come into certain locations. So for us, those are some of our major focus areas at the moment. We're just trying to work out where we can play a part and help. There's still exploration in that way, but I think for us, they're pretty major areas at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. And I guess, I don't know, Albert, I don't think you mentioned it, but the Global Open Finance Centre of Excellence has got some aims around about that, very much in terms of your financial inclusion and being able to kind of help with various different aspects of that. I know there was one kind of intention around about helping with the whole debt recovery process, because it can actually, if someone's in debt, they can take it can be quite difficult to piece together the whole picture, because there's quite a lot of data to draw together to make that picture. And actually, it's kind of a big job, and it takes a while. But through using open banking standards, it should be much easier to bring that together and then speed up the process of getting someone who has these kind of problems the right advice more quickly. So yeah, there is plenty of scope for doing that. There's a couple of questions that have come into the chat, and I'm going to take them in reverse order if that's okay. So what part does trust play in open data, and are there checks if the source is trustable or biased? I guess, Jake, can I bring you in on that? Because if feel free if anyone else wants to chip in. I'll get you to start.
Trust is always a difficult one, and whilst it's become more associated with data, for a long time I have been looking at it in the role of somebody interested in risk management, because clearly one wants to, and there are various ways of attempting to do these things. Openness is a problem, in the sense that it may compromise privacy, and we need to make sure that organisations take on board the importance of that aspect. And we've seen the glorious scandals already that have occurred. I didn't think it was solely the role of government. I'm sorry, Albert. I think there is a need, when one's thinking about such issues, to think about a collective responsibility of those people who are knowledgeable about the context. So we thought about, some time ago, in the context of risk, knowledgeable supervision, where you create bodies or individuals collectively to come together, which can actually give you insights into that trust mechanism to protect people. And I think the problem is the people who know most about many of these things are involved in industry. And that's the way I see it. So that bringing them into connection with the regulator, the government, in that sense, would be very powerful to get real deep insight. So people like Charlotte play a major role in this.
Yeah, I mean, just from our point of view, like when we did our research with our customers, but also non-bank customers, we didn't really realize how strong that trust element was. You know, that came across big time through the work that we did. So it's really something that we're exploring very seriously at the moment, and what's our role to play in this whole sort of ecosystem. But as Jake said, it is a massive piece it is, I think it was something that took us a little bit by surprise, because, you know, banks, especially our bank, you know, have often become a bit of a, you know, a flogging horse in recent times. So I think for us, we're taking it very seriously, and we are looking at all aspects. So looking at our data, because, you know, in the past, customer data has not always been the best. Looking at what we do around that, our due diligence and how we keep it updated. We're also looking at to what extent is that trust, like where can we take it, and what would people feel comfortable with as well. We know open banking is in place and people can consent to share their data, but what more can we do around this, and how can we do it that's in an acceptable way to customers as well, because there is a lot of risk attached to this. So we are exploring it, we are pushing the boundary slightly internally, but we're also trying to get to a place where we know customers are okay, you know, with this type of thing. And there's technologies such as self-sovereign identity that are coming on the scene, which are really, you know, testing the limits a little bit of, like, you know, how comfortable, you know, people would feel about using this type of thing. So there's a lot going on in the space, and it's a really, really interesting time to be testing and learning as well. So yeah, we're taking it very seriously. I think we have a part to play, you know, in this.
Okay, thank you very much. Agreed. Albert, do you want to comment on that, or?
Yeah, no, I would, because I mean, I think so in terms of making data open, I guess one of the things that I've found is we in government, and by the way, Jake, I'm delighted you don't think it's just down to government in this space. That suits me fine. But we in government face typically a number of barriers. One of them just is just technical barriers to actually building the pipelines to publish data, and the work that's involved. But fundamentally, actually, probably the biggest one is this issue of trust. And there's a number of angles on this. You know, Jake mentioned one of them around ensuring that we don't compromise people's privacy, and we're very sensitive to that. And the effort to do that often means that you know, we can't make data available, or that we can't make it available quite in the form or the level of detail that people would like. But I think for me, more fundamentally, there's this trust, and it's a kind of a two-way trust between the people making the data available and the people consuming the data about how to interpret it and its meaning. And you know, we try to make sure that our data is really, really well described. But you know, kind of as Jake said, there's a lot of subtlety and nuance often in data. There are there's typically lots of different ways of looking at one issue, and the way that we interpret that data has the potential, as I think somebody has said in the chat, you know, has the potential to make for a much more informed, as I said earlier, much more informed and engaged debate, better engagement, I think, from civil society. But if that data isn't used and interpreted in an appropriate way, I think it can lead to the diametrically opposed outcome of misinformation, and you know, and almost supports or has the risks the kind of uses that we see sometimes in political discourse. I'm just trying to think of a way of saying it, but anyway, across the pond anyway. So so I think this issue of trust is really at the heart of a lot of the challenges around open data, and I think you know, to another of the points in the chat, I think that one of the best ways of helping to address that is around skills, and I really don't mean here really, you know, sort of data skills necessarily per se. I mean the critical thinking skills that we need in you know, in our communities and society. And that I think are fostered by bringing that into the curriculum in schools. So I think that's a really great point that Antonia made in the chat, and that's certainly something that that I think we need to see more. But you know, always interested in hearing others' views on that.
Thanks, Albert, and to your point about, I think the point that was made in the chat about civic engagement perhaps there's some kind of research piece that could be done around about the use of it and maybe some of the behaviours that come out of that. I don't know, an academic, just as you were talking, it made me think of that. But just, there's a couple of other questions, and I want to get through them. So this one probably, Albert's for you. Should governments be more active in educating people about what their data is and how they should manage it?
So I think that governments should be active, and education systems should be active in helping our populations to be informed about data and be able to think critically about how their data is used and to understand that. So whether we should be, you know, our precise role in that, I think, is something we're still trying to work through, but I think it's certainly a role for the education system. And again, you know, Paul, I'm not sure I would necessarily see this as directly about data. I think we need to, it's about the way our education system empowers people, empowers learners with those skills to become active and engaged members of society broadly, including the way that their data is used, and really understanding the benefits of data as well, of their data to society, and be, you know, active and engaged as well.
Okay, thank you. Has anyone else got anything to chip in on that?
Yeah, I was just thinking as I was talking, when we did our research last year, it was really interesting to talk to people about how they use their data and how they were sharing it in so many different locations as well. And there was a real acceptance that people were using this convenience creep. So just because they needed something, they were just giving away data. And I think there's real recognition when you get them just to step back a little bit and view it again and go, actually, I need it, you know, I need to keep more control over it. I need to deal with it better. I need to know where it's being shared. I need that transparency and also that ability to revoke it as well, which we thought was really interesting. So, you know, I think it's a sign of the times, you know, with the likes of Google's and Facebook, that we just go share, share, share. And in actual fact, when you stop and think about it, you think, oh, actually, I need to do that better. So that's what we're thinking, is like, how do we help address that as well?
Okay, thank you. Yes. Just, I'm conscious of time. There is one more question in the Q&A, and if people want to start raising their hands as well, just do that, and then we'll get around to that. But the question that was here was about how we're influencing a shared future, and how can improvements to collaboration between different partners actually be enabled? Because it's something we all talk about, but it is difficult to achieve sometimes because people have got different objectives, and there are various different drivers that we all have. So who would like to chip in first with any thoughts on that?
I'll go first, and then people can blow me away. I mean, to a certain extent, I wholeheartedly agree with Albert in the sense that education is one of the most important things, and getting education at appropriate times. The work by Tina and Caroline was all about finding transition points for people, and obviously losing the jobs and various other issues are transition points. So it's all about being able to give people the right kinds of information when they require it. So that is very, very important in this context. So that's why we've had the interventions that we've had over the last few years. We're now going into Wales, an interesting place.
Thanks. Has anyone else got any other points to make on that question?
I suppose around collaboration, I suppose I see it at a number of levels, Brian. I mean, you know, the things like our Open Government Partnership and our Open Government Action Plan is, you know, certainly a way of developing a shared approach to the future and influencing a shared future, and we're developing the next generation of that, I think, starting in February next year, next iteration of that. So I think at that strategic level, that's kind of an example of something tangible happening, and it's one way to kind of foster that between different parts of society, different interests and different perspectives. I think that, but it's also partly about collaborating around particular efforts. And I think you know, a good example of that, I mentioned Scottish Army earlier on. You know, they worked with us. We worked with supporting them around using data that we're publishing and others are publishing to provide a really great COVID dashboard that was also enabled with additional technology that isn't available on our public dashboard for helping people with different hearing impairments. So there's sight impairment. So there's various examples, I think. What I don't really see, and what I think we're finding it difficult to solve, is how to make that kind of more systematic. So trying to get that right, you know, I tend to find, if I'm honest, that we talk the same communities a number of different times, and those people who are engaged and evangelized, it's quite easy to reach. But getting those collaborations, reaching out more widely, I think is something that we need to work on, and we'll continue to do so.
Thanks very much. And I think events like this are probably quite a good example of because it's bringing together people from all sorts of different backgrounds and things. So that will hopefully help foster collaboration. And I guess on that, I'm aware that we are out of the time that we had allotted, and actually, amazingly, we have also managed to get to answer all the questions. So I'll hand back to Rui, and thanks very much everyone for the discussion and the questions and observations.
Thanks so much everyone. Katy, Jake, Charlotte, Albert, thank you. Thank you for the discussion, very interesting. I just want to give everyone a heads up. We're posting a link to our feedback form on the chat. It'd be great if you could provide some feedback on how the event went and what we could do better next time. Really trying to make this a recurring thing that we can do, getting people together from different sectors, from different experiences, and promoting these conversations. See if we can promote more collaboration, more projects for the better outcomes of Scotland.